Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody, Mike here. Welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you guys that listen and watch every week, and there's a lot of you, and I am very grateful. I have a topic today that's going to be interesting. This isn't a purely vintage topic, but it applies to vintage because it really applies to the whole hobby. And I'm seeing this movement, this transformation of the hobby towards percentages. And what I mean by that is percentages of value, percentages of comps, all these things. When I see negotiations and I watch card show vlogs and other things, and it's become the topic, or kind of the term du jour is percentage of value, percentage of this. And I want to talk through that a little bit because I think it's important for you guys out there to know, A, what's going on, B, why it's going on, and C, is there any way you can combat it or fight it or whatever, kind of go against the grain. And I wanted to bring one of my very good friends on to talk about it, who is dealing with this almost every day. And it's JT, Triple Crown 24. How you doing, JT?
Great, Mike. Are you at 100% today? Because I'm feeling like 95 personally. But
well, I've had 2 cups of coffee this morning, so I am wide-eyed and bushy-tailed now. But okay, JT, you're now a full-time dealer. You have been for several years. I have tracked your progress, advised you occasionally on your dealing habits, and you've become very savvy. And you're just getting a lot of experience really quickly. And so that's kudos to you. But my question is, and your last few vlogs, and if you guys don't watch JT's card show vlogs, they're really well done because he kind of goes through the step-by-step process of making a deal, whether it's buying or selling. And it's just fascinating to watch the interactions between you and customers. Again, both on the buy side and the sell side. When did this whole percentage thing start becoming a thing, and how does it affect you? Or what do you think about it?
Good question. It's a really good question. I would say that the percentage thing has really been around for a long time. To give you guys some context, Mike and I came up with this idea. Well, Mike really came up with this idea for this topic, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half ago from when we were recording this.
Yeah.
And ever since we kind of planned to record this, I've been thinking about it, and I've been kind of thinking, because I kind of expected you to ask me that question. I think that the percentage thing has been around for a long time. It's just more so in front of your face now. Because if you look back, there's a show around here that has been around since the 90s, and I live in Cincinnati area. Most of you who are familiar will probably put 2 and 2 together to figure out what show that is. But I still see dealers that have signs that say, like, selling at 70% of book price on vintage cards. In that case, that's a percentage right there. I think that back in the day, and granted, I'm speaking just from my own guesses here, if someone wants to confirm with this, most dealers probably paid a percentage of Beckett book value. And the reason that I say that is because if you look at an area like, say, the TCG realm, trading card game realm, a lot of dealers with that, say, like for Pokemon cards, will pay a percentage based off of TCG player, which is kind of like the, I guess, non-sports equivalent of the Beckett guide, meaning that the percentage game is very strong over there. There's usually a pretty standard they'll pay 70% of TCG, or a shop would pay 50% of TCG. I've been in shops before where I know that they pay a certain percentage as well on cards. I think that is now translated where people have seen this and now they want to kind of role play a little bit as a shop owner or as a dealer and kind of copy that. That's why you hear this percentage thing so much, because I've heard it from dealers for years, really since I started. To give you an idea, one of the first shows I ever did, these guys would take what they got on their cards and whatever they paid for it, they would double it. And when they would negotiate, when people asked them, what can you do on this, they would take 10% off. And then the next stage would be 20% off. And if it was a last resort, they would take 30% off, which would make it a 20 to 30% margin, depending on what the card was. And it was very formulaic in that sense. And as the hobby has kind of grown into a lot of people trying to use formulas and math to predict values, I think the percentage thing has only increased in popularity.
Yeah, you amazing point, and I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. First of all, as a business, if you're a dealer or a card shop, there's a profit margin that you need to hit in order to stay in business. There's a certain profit margin. Now, that won't happen 100% of the time, but you're targeting a certain percentage gain on anything, whether it's card or supplies or you name it, right? You got to mark them up to keep the lights on. That's how capitalism works, is making profit. So that's a good point, that it's been around forever and everybody's always thought in that way. It just feels like it's becoming so much more mainstream and everybody's talking about it. It's funny, like you in your vlog, as an example, like somebody comes up to you and they might say something around like, hey, what do you need to get out of this? Right, on a card. Let's say you have it $100. And my answer snarkily would have been, well, I put a sticker. I need to get $100. That's why I put a sticker on it of $100. I didn't put, $90 or $80 or whatever you're willing to give me as a percent off of that. I put $100 on there because that's what I want to get out of it. Like, what do you want to get out of this card? $100, or else I would have put 90, or whatever. And so that always cracks me up when people ask that question. And it makes me realize that probably since the beginning of time, the situation you just described, where we see cards overpriced all the time. And we, as a vintage dealer or vintage buyer, when I go to shows and I see outrageous prices and I look up recent sales of a certain card, and I'm always perplexed why a card might sell for $150 and they have it for $220 or something, and I'm not naive enough to think that the dealer doesn't know that, right? I would think sometimes they'll admit, I haven't priced these in a while, repriced these in a while, that these are old prices or whatever. And so sometimes they'll admit that they're not completely up to par. But by and large, I would guess that most dealers know what the cards are valued at in terms of current sales, current market. Again, you can value a card for whatever you want. That doesn't mean someone's going to pay it. And that's the funny trick thing about card, is pricing it is so, it's a mystery, right? It feels like an enigma that you're walking into, because again, what's a card worth? Well, it's only worth what someone's willing to pay. I'm willing to pay less than maybe the next guy. And so maybe the next guy's your buyer, not me, because I'm only going to be willing to pay a certain amount for a card, right? And so, but it's turned into this conversation surrounding percentages and using that as the basis for negotiation instead of just looking at a card. I guess I'll tell you my kind of the way I look at it when I'm going in to look at a card. If I find a card that I like, I'm going to look at recent sales and try to average it out, or kind of think. And I will look at, I know you poo poo on this in your video, but I will look at kind of the lowest sale and think, okay, I want to get as close to that as I can. Because to me, I want to pay as little as I can for every card. The dealer wants to get as much as they can for every card, and so somewhere there's a happy medium, right, where we both walk away slightly disappointed, which means it's probably a good deal. You know what I mean?
I do. That's the age-old tear between dealers and buyers. You want it for the lowest price you can get it. I want the most out of it that I can get it. We are at a impasse that will never be cleared in that
Right.
regard. But to your point, if we want to look at the percentage thing, when people say that they want to buy at a certain percentage, let's use 80, because that's kind of a benchmark almost in this day and age, where like 80 is kind of one of the minimum accepted percentages. If you tell me 80% of the lowest sale, let's say that it's $80 on a card, and I'm willing to sell it at 80% of the highest sale, which is 120, it's a pretty big difference, because 20% off at my price, we add that up, is going to be a lot lower than, or a lot more, excuse me, than 20% at your price. What would that be? It would be 64, I guess, if you were buying at $80.
Yeah.
It would be 96 for me if we're taking the highest sale. I mean, that's a pretty significant difference in terms of the overall card value. You're talking about a 50%
50%.
swing pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So I know recently, I was in Strongsville and I sold 2 big cards. And when I did the math, and I found myself doing this, I went, well, what percent of comps did I get for those 2 Babe Ruth 33 Gaudy cards that I sold? And it was 90% of comps, and I found out literally like the next show I saw Ash. I sold him to Ash, right? Big vintage dealer. He's at all the major shows, and he had sold one of them already for more than comps. So good for him, right? He paid me 90% of comps, thinking that he could get at least comps or better. And on a card like that, if you make 10%, if it's a $10,000 card, you make $1,000. That's a good day. And so 1,000 or 10% on $10 isn't that awesome, right? So does the value matter to you as a dealer in terms of what comps you're willing to come to, in the value of the card, the aggregate dollars that you're going to get? Does that matter to you?
Here's the thing with what you said, is that I think that there's a fundamental flaw in the percentage game in terms of what you just said, because you just said comps, and you say that to me in a way where we kind of know that comps means this. But I'd be willing to bet that if I told you, tell me what comps are on that Babe Ruth, and you told me to do the same, we'd come up with a different number. And
For
I
sure.
find that that's the experience on most cards, even cards that are transacted often. Let's say, since this is a vintage show, let's go with a Ricky Henderson rookie. Can we call that vintage?
Sure.
All right, cool.
Just barely.
Barely. But it's a card that sells often. And pretty much
Sure.
any grade, you can find plenty of sales for it, except for maybe the 9s that are out there. There's plenty of sales for that card. I bet you even on something like that, we would still come up with a different number on terms of what are comps. In addition to that, they're constantly changing. Like what the sales were on that Babe Ruth might change from week to week. I mean, I had people at a show a couple weeks ago that were kind of flabbergasted that I hadn't updated my prices since Monday, and the show was on Sunday. Like, I'm sorry that that it's moved so fast in the last 6 days that I'm not up to the minute with my pricing. But if you want to work with me, that's fine. That's the difference, though, is that it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. You can say this is what, whereas back in the day, if we say, okay, this is the Beckett book value, maybe there might be high Beckett or low Beckett, but that's the number. That is the book value. There is no book value. It is very subjective. And one of the things that I took a persuasion class in college. One of the things that I was taught very early on was that you can manipulate numbers to any argument that you want. 65% of facts are made up, or facts with numbers are made up, including that one I just said right there. And you can manipulate those numbers any way you want to. So I guess to answer your question, I'm more so looking at it as Yes, there is a percentage that I want to buy at, but it's more so a percentage of what do I think I can get for it? Like, I want to know what is the value of the card? What am I going to put on it? And what can I expect to get out of it? And trying to visualize what the actual sale of that card will look like. Who is it going to be to? How is it going to get done? Is it going to be at a show? Is it going to be at eBay? I don't have some magical crystal ball. All I have is my experience and my gut, and that's all I can really rely on. But doing enough of these deals, you kind of develop that sixth sense, and in a way, you can move around this very formulaic system of buying that we've run ourselves into.
So you deal mainly in ultra modern football, basketball, baseball. And I think the world of percentages is way different in the ultra modern world than it is in the vintage world. Agree or disagree?
100% agree.
Okay. And so I want to talk about that in a second. So don't let me forget. But the drive, what I see is the driving force of a lot of this percentage discussion that I see going around the hobby is around repackers. And maybe some of the vintage people that are watching this don't know what a repacker is, but simply put, it's a person who is wanting to buy cards and they are going to either resell them on what they're just basically a reseller. They're going to resell them on a platform like Whatnot, on a live stream. They're not repacking the cards into another product per se in terms of packaging and all that, but they're building an inventory that they can then resell on a platform. Is that right, JT? Am I kind of saying that right?
Yeah, and this is also something again that's nothing new. One of the biggest repackers in the game is Hit Parade. I'm sure you're familiar with them. I'm even most people who are listening to this, if you've gone to the National before, I can almost guarantee you've seen the Hit Parade booth or you've at least seen their products somewhere. And they've been around for a very long time. They're one of the OGs in terms of repackers. And it used to be a joke back in the day when I was first doing shows pre-COVID that, oh yeah, Hit Parade came through, so it was a good day at the show because they would come through and pay you pretty close to your sticker price on a lot of your cards. But now there's a lot of repackers who are doing the same thing, and to their credit, a lot of them actually do have packaging with their logo on it, and it's more than just me taking my printer and printing it off and getting my glue stick out and putting it on a bubble mailer. I mean, the presentation is solid, to say the
Yeah.
least. Some of them are a little bit more, I guess, simplistic in terms of just we're writing a number on a bubble mailer and shuffling them all around, which makes sense. It's as long as it's efficient and fair, more power to them for running this. But yeah, the repackers I feel is a very large percentage, no pun intended, of the people who have kind of brought the percentage game to the forefront of buying and selling.
And they, by and large, are wanting a percentage discount off the lowest sale or the last sale.
That's a good question, Mike, because what they tell you might be different than what is actually true. I went through and I have watched a lot of repacks because I've done videos on this and I have more videos planned for this as well, just to kind of see, okay, are these guys telling the truth or not? I have one experience personally where I had a card. It was a RPA from 2023 Panini Immaculate of a player where the last sale on it was $85. Every other sale of that card had been at 100. But this guy wanted to work off of that sale because he said they are going to want me to go off of this. I always hear that. Well, they are going to have an issue with it. I'd really like to know who they is because they sounds like a real jerk.
Right.
Because they're always lowballing people and getting upset about things that are really very mundane and non-consequential in the big scheme of things with these very petty things. But no, they will tell you sometimes it's the last sale. It is whatever will fit their narrative, whatever will get them the best price. If the last sale is particularly high, well, that one was shill bid. Doesn't matter if it actually was or not. No, that one was shill bid. or that was right after this player had a really good game, or oh, well, this guy died and the prices spiked. There's always some excuse when it doesn't fit their narrative. But if it does fit their narrative, they're going to run with it. There's not really a clear answer in terms of what exactly they're going to use. It's going to be whatever will give them the most advantage that they can and the most bang for their buck that they can. But you best believe when it comes time to value them for the repacks, it's going to be the other way around, where it's going to be value them at the max percentage. I'm sure, if some repackers watching this like, oh, well, that's not true, I'd have to disagree.
Yeah. I've seen in the vintage world repacking manifest itself in, you'll see an entire set break, a 57 top set, and there's a mantle in there, and it's probably graded a 3 or a 4 or whatever. There's the air and the May, all the cards are in there, and they basically, you buy a box and you get 3 or 4 random cards from the sets, and it might be good and it might be commons. You never know what you're going to get. But what they'll do is they'll buy the set for, I'm just going to use, this isn't a 57 top set, would be more than, they'll buy the whole set for $2,000. They calculate their costs of packing and all the stuff, and let's say it's another $1,000, and they'll make 100 of them, and they'll price them at $50 a piece to make a profit on, which means the sum is way more than you could just go buy the set, but there are so many people out there that love to buy that and take the gamble on, I can spend $50. I'm going to get 4 57 tops cards, and I might pull a mantle, and it's the same, I guess, trigger that makes people buy modern wax, is the chase, the optimism that, it's going to be me this time. I'm going to hit the lottery on this and pull the one card out of 500 that's going to make this worth it. And by and large, obviously, you end up losing. You end up losing money. You spend $50 and you get $20 worth of cards. I mean, that's kind of the nature of it. But that's an interesting, in the vintage world, it feels like there's also the dynamic of what matters in the vintage world more than the ultra modern world. I'll get to my point here. Ultra modern, a 10 is a 10 is a 10 is a 10, and 9 is a 9 is a 9 is a 9. Eye appeal factors into vintage, especially graded card or raw cards for that matter, significantly more than it does in the ultra modern world. I mean, ultra modern technology, most cards are printed, identically. You don't have that in the vintage world. And so what I hear the vintage term is, I paid up for that card, right? I paid up for that. I paid more, or at comps, I didn't pay a percentage because of the eye appeal of said card. And so that adds a wrinkle, a different dynamic to the vintage world, I think, than there is in the ultra modern world. What do you think about that?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there, Mike. There's a lot to say. I want to start with what you said about a set break, and you were absolutely right. It is a gamble, and people like to be able to take the risk. I mean, if we use your example, say $50 a spot, can you imagine that you get a Frank Robinson rookie in that 57 top set break for $50? That is the allure of doing that set break. Here's the thing, though, is that, I mean, usually I would say on those set breaks, there's a general guideline of, okay, well, this card is going to be VGEX or better, and you can expect that. But as you said, VGEX can manifest in a lot of different ways. The corners could be razor sharp, but it's one of the worst centered examples of that card you've ever seen. Whereas you could get one where it's got some rounded corners, but it is beautifully centered. Maybe the registration's a little bit off. There are a lot of different ways to manifest a 4. And my observation here, you can definitely speak on this yourself as a vintage collector. Vintage collectors like to know what they're getting. All right, you want to pick an example of a card where you know exactly what you're getting. It appeals to you. The qualities of it are what you are looking for in a card. Whereas with the ultra modern game, I guess I could say there's not as much loyalty to the cards because, okay, I don't get this CJ Stroud based prism. I'll just get one of the other thousands that are out there. they all look the same. There's not really going to be something about this particular one that appeals to me. Maybe if it's a numbered card and it happens to be number 7, his jersey number, if that's your thing, or if it's number 1 of 100 or whatever the case may be, and you like those first on print cards, maybe that's something that appeals to you. But outside of that, in terms of like the actual visual appearance of the card, the differences are very, I mean, maybe a
Subtle.
centering issue here and there. Yeah. Sometimes you get some that are miscut, but really in the grand scheme of things, no, they pretty much all look identical. Especially if you're someone who mostly dives into vintage, then they definitely will look very similar because you're used to such wider swings in variance. Uh, Kind of moving on to the other half of what you said there is that I guess it ties into the 57 set break example too. The percentage thing with vintage and people paying strong on something is because they're not every grade is created equal. Whereas, VGEX4 might be, oh, this one has perfect centering. And my experience is that, like at a lot of shows, especially with the national coming up, everybody in the room is going to have the best looking PSA 467 mantle. If you ask any dealer, like, oh, yeah, this is the best one I've seen. And that was the case for the last 20 booths that I've been to as well. They all had the best PSA 4. Everybody always thinks that theirs is the best, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I see with that. Um, but I think there you can kind of see something where we talk about, highest comp, lowest comp. There is something close to that in a book value in vintage, and that being VCP. A lot of vintage dealers will use vintage card prices VCP, where it will show you a high, low, and average of the card. And ideally, they're going to price their stuff at high VCP. And you might even hear that too. A dealer will explicitly say, like, yep, prices are at high VCP or a little bit below that. And that's kind of where they can make it up too, because if they're valuing it at low VCP and then buying it at a percentage, it's the same thing as a CJ Stroud Prism sells for 100, 110, and 80, and I'm going to value it at 80 and then take a percentage off of that.
Yeah, the vintage world's very different. It's fascinating to think, though. Let's take your mantle example, your PSA 467, and you say, let's just say that's a $300 car. I don't know what it is, but $300, and I get it for $250 from the dealer. What always has irritated me, and there's no solution for this. This is the thing where I'm just basically yelling at the wind, because the new lows, or the new sale, the value of that card is $250, right? And that never gets recorded in private sales or cash deals. And the only deals that you see are either auction house deals. This is mainly vintage, right? Auction house deals and or eBay sold listings. It's not all encompassing. This has been true forever. This isn't new. I'm not, breaking any news here. But it's always been a fascinating thing that those sales are not being recorded, and therefore not affecting the comp. Is still the online comp is still the online comp. A card at $100, you sell it for 80. Shouldn't 80 now be the comp? And then you have to, point being, where I'm going with that is, if every sale was included, I think it would drive all prices lower, because you're usually selling at a discount of online sales in person. And there's a reason for that. There's a benefit to that. You're not paying tax, you're not paying shipping, you're not paying eBay fees and all that. So to give a percentage off of online sales is actually I would consider that fair. And I do that. I have this song and dance with dealers all the time. I'll see a card on eBay for $100. Like, I could literally go buy it for $100. Same card, same grade. Obviously, eye appeal matters, but let's just say they have similar eye appeal, and he has 130 on it. And I'm like, hey, I could go buy this card for $100. Oh, but you don't have to pay, you don't have to pay tax or shipping if you buy it from me. And I say, well, you don't have to pay eBay fees. So, you know what I mean? It's that argument can go both ways. yes, I'm saving money, but so are you. And so let's find a deal here, because I've done it many times where I literally go and hit the buy it now, and I'll show the dealer, I just bought it. You just lost a sale. And I'm kind of a dick about it, honestly. I'm just admitting that. Like, okay, you don't want my money for cardboard? Fine. And I buy it right there and I say, sorry, man, you lost out. I would have bought it from you, but whatever. And because I don't care, I don't need it right then, which some collectors are like that. They'd rather buy it in person, pay a little more to get the card in person versus buying it online. But with graded vintage, usually there's good pictures. You can kind of see what you're getting and make a determination on as to which card has better eye appeal for what you like, as we talked about earlier. But the whole idea that I would think it would, if all sales were included somehow, some way, and there's no way, literally no solution for this, but I think it would continually drive prices lower and lower, lower, lower. Right?
And it's a cruel irony too, Mike, because a lot of people are using this sales data from a platform that they refuse to sell on themselves. If
Right.
eBay is this Bible, for lack of a better term, for pricing, why not sell these cards on eBay? Oh, well, I don't like eBay and their practices and all the fees and all that. Okay, but you're using eBay to determine your prices. I mean, to me, the irony is not lost in that assessment. And yes, the whole, oh, well, you're not paying fees. Well, you're not paying taxes and shipping. You can get it right here. That is another one of those age old debates that people will argue till they're blue in the face. There is definitely something to be said about being able to inspect a card in person. Like, for example, I would say for you, a comma card, something that you probably really want to take a look at and say, okay, I want to be able to examine this card, make sure there's no wrinkles that maybe don't show up as well on a scan or something. And that threshold is going to be different for someone else. It might be if they're spending $100 on a card. Okay, I want to make sure that this looks great. Or if it's a card that really matters to them. Let's say that you're doing the Nolan Ryan tops run. Well, that will say 72 Nolan Ryan. You want to be able to see that in person because it means a lot to you. You want to have a nice example of that card. Where if it's a 72 Al Kaline, for example, you might be like, all right, I'm just kind of getting this to fill out my set. I don't necessarily need the nicest possible example of it. It all matters of what
Yeah.
it means to you.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
totally true. Totally true.
right. And another part of it too is like what you said. I think on cards that transact often, it should be treated differently than cards that don't. And my experience is that most people say that they agree with that, but in practice, they don't. I gave an example in my very last vlog of a Miguel Cabrera autograph that I was selling that hadn't sold since July. This guy was using a sale from July of 2023. It's it's June. It's been almost a year since that sale. Should that sale really have a influence on what the price is today? In my opinion, not really.
Right.
I mean, it certainly shouldn't be the only thing that we're considering, but I see it happen a lot where people will take a sale from say 6 months ago, and that's the price. That's what we're going to work off of here. And I'm not going to just ignore that information. Obviously, I'm going to use it too, but to call that the end all be all, it goes both ways. And I say this as a dealer where just because a card last sold for something doesn't mean that I'm going to get it for that price. I'm going to get that price for it again. Whereas it's not a stock or it's not a precious metal, not a precious metal gem, but an actual precious metal where there is a assigned value to it. Right? We have this trade price, or we have what is what is the value of gold? What is the value of silver? And you can get that value. Now they do fluctuate, but you know exactly what you can cash them out for. There is no such thing with that on cards. And again, if you think that's the case, like, well, I have a guy that will buy all this stuff at 90% of comps. Well, again, comps is not the same thing to you as it is to me. It is very subjective as much as we try to make it formulaic and try to calculate it. There are too many factors that go into it for it to be a one size fits all thing. And I think that's especially true in vintage. We talked about eye appeal. We talked about being able to examine the card in person. We talked about scarcity. That's one thing that we can dive into more. Scarcity. Before we started recording this, I was looking at your set list of like all the cards that you want. You do the 5-star autos. 2012 5-star autos are near impossible to find. I don't know anybody who's still opening the product. One of the ones in there is Roy Halladay. He's passed away. His autographs have gone up significantly due to that fact. The last time that I can see a sale of that card on Card Ladder is January 1st of 2022. Are we going to go off of that sale?
No.
Right. And I would venture to say too that if I went through your list right now and you told me what grade you wanted for a card or if it was raw, and I took the last sale of every single one of those cards and I said, Mike, you can buy these cards right now at this exact same sale, no questions asked. I bet you'd be breaking out the wallet pretty quickly for a lot of those cards. But the truth is, a lot of them just aren't available right now. You on some of your examples where you can buy that card in front of the dealer on eBay for cheaper, that's great. But if they have it and there's none other ones available, what are you going to do about it if they're not willing to sell it to you at the last sale?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You're going to whine until they until they cave in and give you that sale? Because I've had people do that to me. There's nothing you can do.
Scarcity matters. And I'll go back to, I do have a threshold where I'd pretty much only buy a card in person. Usually it's 500 or more, maybe 1,000. That comma card, I want to see it, hold it, look at it. I don't buy those types of cards on eBay ever. I wouldn't say I would never do it, but it's not the way that I like to build my collection. The scarcity thing, the Halladay thing, interesting example because they're like unicorns. So let's say one did come up and somebody put $500 on it. Who's to say that's wrong? I mean, how do you price a card that is so exceedingly rare? It's not unheard of, but they don't pop up. And so that's the thing about, if you're doing a mantle run, or those are readily available. But the challenge I'm having is finding the stuff that is not graded very often, even of low end guys. We were talking about a 67 Topps Jim Bunning, right? And we were going through, that's a very expensive card in mid grade, because I've submitted 2, both have come back miscut men's size from PSA. I know they're authentic, but they're hard to get graded for whatever printing reason or manufacturing reason. So that scarcity issue certainly plays into my decisions on buying cards. If I saw a Halladay priced at 500 and the one that sold in 2023 January was 200, who's to say it's not 5? Like, I have to decide as a collector, how bad do I want this card? Am I willing to just pay whatever because you don't see them? And it kind of, gives you so much leverage as a dealer, I would think. Like, hey, go find another one. I've got 500 on this. Go find another one. Good luck. And it allows a dealer to stick to their guns more, because somebody's going to realize and recognize how just rare that is. I'll bring up another example. I love talking about experience, real life experience, because that's, I think, this just true. This just happened. You and I were at the National, I guess it was a couple of years ago, may have been Atlantic City. In fact, I think it was. Do you remember the Eddie Murray 2001 Greats of the Game autograph?
I
Do you
do.
remember this? So it was Atlantic City. So that is a 2001 Greats of the Game, is Fleer Greats of the Game, is a set that I'm trying to build. And the short prints are difficult. And typically difficult means expensive. We saw a PSA graded 8 or a 9. It doesn't matter what the grade was, because I didn't care at all. And I think it was maybe $80 I paid, maybe 90, something like that. But I bought this card, and you're like, the conversation I won't remember the details, but it was like, was that a good deal? Was essentially what you asked. And I said, look up the comps on that car. And you did. And it was 150, 200, 300, some crazy number, because they don't ever come up. And when I saw it, I even paid less than sticker, if I remember right. But I was going to pay sticker if I had to, because it was such a good deal. And my point of telling that story is patience matters in this. As a collector, you need to be patient. You need to stick to your guns. Um, Even if the holiday came up and it was $500, I would be very hesitant to pay that much for that card, just because I don't know that it's worth it. Maybe it is. Kofax autos for 5-star, crazy expensive. I haven't bought one just because didn't want to pay what people are charging. Is it worth
It's not
that?
worth it to you. It may be
Right.
worth it to someone else, though.
Exactly. And that's the point, is every collector has to decide what they are willing to pay for a card, period, paragraph. If you see a nice example of a card you want and you're willing to pay more than comps, great, good for you. There's no wrong way to do that. I just like to pay as little as I can. And I joke all the time, never pay sticker and all that kind of stuff, which is a mantra I try to stick to.
I mean, that Eddie Murray must have been a pretty good deal if you're even considering paying sticker. That tells anybody who's listening to this anything. If Mike Moynihan's willing to pay sticker, man, you must have a really good deal on that.
And what's funny is that show, I bought a 53 Tops mantle. I bought a lot of great cards at that national, and that was the card I probably at the end of the day was most excited to get, and it was under $100 card, because I never see them, because feel like I got such a great deal. I was so happy to add that to my collection, and it was a relatively cheap card, right, compared to some other stuff that I bought that weekend. And that's the joy. There's a lot of joy in the hobby. To me, there's a lot of joy in the negotiating process, in the making of the deal, right? The art of the deal, as my friend Ed Westergriff would say, the art of the deal. And I enjoy the banter. I enjoy the negotiating. I'm happy to walk away, which some people aren't. And the scarcity matters. If I saw a holiday, I'd have to really, and it was at some crazy price, I can't tell you I wouldn't pay it. But I would just, holy crap, I never see these. So scarcity does matter for sure.
Right. I think that's important too, because there is different levels of prestige to cards. For example, you're not the only guy out there that even we know that's doing the 5-star set. And I'd be willing to venture there's a lot more guys out there who are also looking for those to do that. The same thing with the clear greats of the game autograph set. There are a lot of people out there who want to build that set or are building that set. It has a higher place in, I guess, the hierarchy of all the sets out there. But I'll pick on a low end set here. Say like Panini Illusions or something like that. It's kind of a afterthought product. No disrespect if you happen to like Illusions. But say that I have this numbered card from that set and you don't really have any attachment to it. You just want like a color match of your favorite player from that set. Is it really going to matter if you don't get that one? Because there's a billion other ones that have the color blue on them. So if you don't get that one, no big deal. There's no loyalty to that, especially when you're not collecting it. And I find that the percentage thing most often comes into play with people who are looking to extract value. We had a phone conversation, I think it might have been yesterday or the day before, where you told me people are collecting percentages, not cards. I don't think that the people who are using these percentages are necessarily using them as collecting tools. Usually a percentage to me would indicate that you are then trying to get a certain percentage out of it later on. And that's been my experience. Anyone who's ever used the numbers game with me in terms of percentages at my table, I know their game. And if I don't know their game, it's pretty easy to figure out what their game is. in terms of buying for whatever it may be, whatnot, repacks, just reselling at their table. It's usually resellers who are using this, not
Okay,
collectors.
you're bringing up an amazing point, and I want to, for people out there, vintage people think differently than modern people. The people you're talking about, they don't even care what cards they're buying if they can get it at the right percentage, versus a vintage person who is building a set or targeting a player or finishing a run. They're specifically looking for a certain card, maybe in a certain grade, maybe not. And versus the modern guy, ultra modern guy, I've seen it at your table. People coming up, they just pick crap out seemingly randomly, that they think they can get just the best deal on, regardless of who it is, what sport it is, what product it is. They don't care. What percentage can I get this stack at, so that I can build my inventory to then redo it or resell it, or resell it to anyone, not necessarily in a repack. The vintage person thinks very differently, right? At least my friends do. And we're targeting certain cards, not a percentage. And that's what I meant by that comment of, it feels like, and again, I want to get the best bang for my buck. So if PSA 4 of a 50s card is $40 and a PSA 5 is $80, I'll take the 4 and take that money. And you know what I mean? I'm not sitting there going, which one has the best upside, which one, none of that factors into the decision at all. It's stretching my hobby dollars and getting the most cards that I can in reasonable, in a good, nice copy of the card for the least amount of money to get the most cards. I don't know if that formula makes any sense in the way my brain works, but
No, it certainly does, and I don't want to make it sound like in our conversation here that no ultra modern collectors think that way, because that would just be entirely inaccurate.
of
Uh,
course, of
right.
course.
I think that with ultra modern, it's less goal oriented. So, for example, we'll take your 4 decades set. You have a definitive checklist that is at sometimes fluid because there are new people who get added to the Hall of Fame. There's somebody who gets removed per se, but it is a set in stone criteria. These are the specific cards you want. Whereas ultra modern collectors, there are so many different choices out there where if you tell me, okay, I would like a Peyton Manning autograph. All right, well, you got to be more specific. Do you want a rookie year auto? Do you want a playing days auto? Which brand would you like? Which company would you like? There, and you might say, well, I want all the cards of this player. Take it from a recovering player collector. You and me both, actually. It's pretty much impossible these days. Whereas you can't really set. I would guess that the closest thing would be something like what I'm doing, building some of these parallel sets, or perhaps people who build rainbows, which is, I think, our friend John Keating has described kind of as the new approach to set building is building rainbows, where if I have this low numbered prism card out of 5, that might be the only chance that you get to get that card. Now I got to find the person who's looking for, I don't know, name your favorite obscure NFL receiver here. Let's go with Michael Gallup of your Cowboys. You got to find that guy who's building the Michael Gallup rainbow, but if you can find them, they might be willing to pay strong on that. But that's the thing. I think that there's a lot more people who are goal oriented in their collecting approach for vintage, whereas in modern, there are simply so many choices that it is. I guess you might even be doing a disservice to yourself if you kind of pigeonhole yourself into one area, because there is that expanse of opportunities where if you're willing to loosen your parameters, you will find a plethora of options, which really should benefit you as a buyer, because the seller at that point will need to convince you that this specific card that they have is the one that you want. Whereas you're already convincing yourself of that. Say with your mantle run, you're missing one card. You're missing the 52 tops. I know that you need it because you can't complete your goal without it. Whereas you can definitely complete your goals in some cases with ultra modern stuff a lot easier without X, Y, and Z.
Great point. I hope everybody's hearing this, that we just, the mentality is so different between ultra, not better or worse, just different. The vintage world is set, and it is what it is. It's already all out there. The ultra modern guy can wait a week and a new product's coming out, and a week after that a new product's coming out, and it's always changing and always developing, versus vintage is a set thing. And so if you're focused on vintage, it's a much simpler way to, not again better or worse, but just simple way to collect. Mantle has a certain number of playing days cards. That's set in stone. That's not going to change. There's no other stuff coming out. You don't have to worry about the next Mantle card or whatever. Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, all these guys that are all, it's a, like you said, a finite thing. And my goals are all finite, which is comforting to me. I don't have to, as an old guy, I want to know where the end is. I want to know what the checklist is. I don't want there to be some perpetual, never ending deal out there, because as you get older, you realize I don't have that many days left. I have fewer days ahead of me than behind me. And so I want to have something I can accomplish for the younger person in the ultra modern world. It's, hey, new flavor of the week, let's go. Or new player that's come on and is hot, or a guy has a great NFL Sunday or a great month in baseball. Let's go after this guy for now, whoever that is. And so it's just very different. And again, not better or worse, just very different.
Well, I would say your experience ties into that as well, because I know of people, it's not just young people, but I think anybody who's new to the hobby, to find exactly what you're going to collect and stick with it from day one, to me is, I don't think I've ever heard of that. You've gone through so many different phases. I feel like I've done pretty much every different type of collecting that you possibly could. I've done set building, I've done player collecting, collected players from my favorite teams. I've pretty much done it all, I feel like, at this point, and there's still plenty more for me to do. But when you're first starting out, again, your parameters are going to be always changing, where you're going to find, okay, I like this or I don't like this. And that answer doesn't have to stay the same. 6 months from now, you can say, okay, I don't really enjoy this anymore, because you don't have
Right.
to stick with one thing. I think going back to our main point here is that you had said it too, like these guys, it's just whatever they can get and try to make a little bit on. There's no loyalty to the specific cards. Like when people come up to me and they put together a big stack, I usually can tell it's the same types of cards, and it's usually my best cards. It's the things that are most in demand, and it's exactly what you would expect. Kabooms and downtowns, any of this case hit stuff that's out there. I don't think that there's a single show where I have taken a downtown home with me if it has seen my showcase. That's how insanely popular they are. Now, is that artificial demand, or is it because people actually want them? We'll save that for a different show, because there's no chrome or shiny cards here.
Right.
But still, if we look at overall, they're picking out the RPAs, they're taking the stuff from your cream of the crop brands. If we're talking baseball, your first Bowman autos, or the Topps Chrome stuff, either the color or the autographs, or in the best of both worlds, the colored autographs. Perhaps high-end stuff like Transcendent or Dynasty or 5-Star, those bread and butter, meat and potatoes sets, that's usually what they're going to stick to. And I don't really see that happening too much with vintage, where they're trying to buy vintage up either to resell it or for the repacks. I think that there's definitely a different approach to even the people who resell vintage. I know going up to someone's table or having someone bring vintage to me, I don't think I've ever talked percentages or looked at it through a percentage thing. Not that I really am trying to do that anyways, but there's just something different about it.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned you were touching on the evolution of a collector, and I think the new collector in the hobby, it's all just overwhelming, right? And as you mature in the hobby in terms of time and experience, what makes vintage so attractive to people is the simpleness of it, right? It is that it's not changing all the time, and player performance affects value so significantly, and demand, and who's hot, who's not. It's just a much simpler way to collect. And so I think people start gravitating towards that as they get older. They gain an appreciation for it. There's just this kind of natural process. As you said, I've been everything too. I've been a set collector. I've been an open a pack guy. When I was a kid, I just opened packs. I just bought the current guys because I couldn't afford other stuff or didn't care about it, one or the other or both. And then I became a player collector, and then I finally landed on vintage and went, okay, I can A, afford this stuff now, and B, I absolutely love it. It's a simple way to collect. This is what I'm going to do now. And I've done that now for, 15 years going on, that I've made that shift. And I retired as a Josh Hamilton super collector in 2012. So 2013 ish. So but I was already buying vintage and doing Hamilton. And then I went, okay, enough. I want to really focus and divert my hobby resources towards vintage only, Hall of Fame players specifically. And that's what I've been doing ever since, and see no end to it. Versus, we have friends. I don't want to pick on Garrett, but I will say Garrett,
We can pick on Garrett. That's fine.
We can pick on Garrett. And I'm not even picking on him, but he's very different than me. He collects very different than me. He changes, with the seasons, in terms of not sports seasons, but weather seasons. I'm all in on, wrestling, and then I'm all in on this or that. And he changes all the time, but that's just his personality. It's not even a knock, but that would drive me bananas, and like, no, I want a card to go in the beast and stay there for 20 years. That's how I think. And he just thinks different. Again, not right or wrong, but it's funny how our individual personalities are reflected in the way we collect. I want things to be simple, finite, and my world is chaotic enough. I don't need my collecting to be chaotic, right?
Yeah. And I think and regardless of how you do it, if you are a collector, I bet chances are you're not looking at this percentage thing. I don't think that you ever said, like, okay, I need to get this 67 Jim Bunning at 80%, because what do you need it at 80% for? I get
Right.
that sometimes too, where I'll give you an example. I have this Puka Nakua card that I get asked about. This guy tells me he's a huge fan and he wants it for his collection. And he tells me, if I would value it around 190. Can you do 155? That's like, and then he tells me that's like 80%. It's a little less, but why do you need it at this percentage if it's for your collection then? Like,
Right.
oh, so I can resell it later on. Oh, okay. I see it then. Whereas you guys are not thinking about that. And I've said this before too, is that nobody comes up to my table, buys a card for $100 and says, yep, this is going to be worth $50 tomorrow. And I'm okay with that.
Right.
Nobody thinks that they're making a bad decision when they buy something, and nobody hopes that something dips in value, of course. I mean, you have done your collecting way very measured, I would say, in a sense where you do target certain cards, like say that you're one card away from your 65 tops run. Okay, maybe you're going to pull the trigger and go after that card now because you're one away. You're so close. But really for you, it's more so, all right, what's the best deal I can get? Because I need all these cards. What can I get the most bang for my buck for right now? But that's not in terms of building an inventory. It's looked at as building a collection and using your resources most efficiently to build that collection. Whereas someone like me, aside from my set projects, I'm looking to build an inventory. And it's
Yeah.
more so I'm buying these cards wondering what I will end up getting out of them. And I think the same thing for Garrett, and all the conversations I've had with him. Of course, he doesn't just buy something thinking it's going to go down the next day, but he's very measured in what he does. He picks his spots. He gets good quality cards, and it's because he enjoys them. It's not because, oh, well, I think it's going to go up X percentage. It's because I like it. I think it could appreciate in value in the future. He certainly hopes so, but that's not the end game for him. I think it's for you guys, it's more intrinsic. For a lot of people out there who do the percentage thing, it is extrinsic. It's about what value can be extracted.
100% agree. It's funny you mentioned 65 tops. I think I do only need one, and it's the Tony Oliva. And so that's going to be a target card for the National. Man, great discussion, JT. Thank you so much for coming on and just, I know we covered a lot of things with our goal. I love the fluidity of a conversation about cards and that it can go a lot of different directions and the spontaneousness of that. So I appreciate your willingness to come on and just from your perspective, and you do a lot of shows, and I love hearing, love watching your stuff. If you don't follow JT on Triple Crown 24, you are missing out. Go do that on YouTube. And yeah, thanks, JT, man. That's awesome.
You bet. Thank you, Mike. I'll leave people with this too, because like you said, we talked about a lot of different things. If you're looking for, I guess, one thing to take away, I'll give you a couple. Anybody who's going to the National, if you are going to sell cards and you talk to a certain dealers, they may throw a percentage thing at you. You will probably see it at the National too, whether you're watching someone's video or you're going yourself. You will see signs that people are saying, I'm buying at this percentage. And understand, if you have cards that are transacted more often, you could probably expect that that's what you're going to get out of it. And there's not much wiggle room there. If you have something that is truly rare and truly means a lot to you, do not let someone 80% you, as we say in the game.
Yeah.
Do not let someone take the lowest sale that they can find. The way that I look at it, firm but fair, right? Because I know that these dealers, they're going to mark it up at the same, they're going to take the highest price and then mark it up a little bit more. Everybody does it. People can say they're on this moral high ground and they don't do that. No, everybody I've run into does it. I do it myself. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I do it myself. I mark it up because I know I'm going to get talked down. And if there's some vice versa as well, if you're someone who's looking to buy something, and it doesn't have to be at the National, it can be your local show, it can be on eBay, it can be on social media. Just because it last sold at a certain price doesn't mean you should pay that price. And it goes both ways. It doesn't mean that you should have to pay up to get there. And it doesn't mean that you can't pay more to get that. I think what's most important is, how badly do I want it? What is the likelihood I will find another one? And what is the likelihood that when I find another one, whenever that may be, that it will be around the price that I want to pay? Those are the things that you got to keep in mind, if I had to summarize.
I agree. Once I buy a card, I don't go back and, except once a year, did I do good on that, or was it a good buy or a bad buy? Has it gone up or down? Not even because I'm thinking about reselling it or whatever, but just, hey, everybody wants to feel like they made a good decision. That hits all the endorphins, like, yes, I did well on that, good for me. But yeah, if you want a card, buy it. Right. So thanks, JT. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for listening out there. We'll see you next week for another episode. Keep collecting.